been a couple of days since I did a video. I think I'm going to do 3. These are going to be dealing with Old Testament stuff. And only because you need to understand certain things about the Old Testament because of the world you live in today. And because so many things are mistaught. Again, so much of what I talk about is what you've been taught and how misguided it is. Today I'm going to give you some background on Israel, what happened, how they became Israel, how they ultimately did not become Israel, and so forth like that. So, you know, Abraham, God made a covenant with him about his descendants. And so Abraham ultimately had the child of promise, Isaac. Isaac had Jacob. He also had Esau, but Jacob was the one God had promised to continue what he was going to do through Abraham's lineage. Jacob had 12 sons, and we will get into that when we talk about the rich man and Lazarus. I'm gonna change your understanding of that for sure. And then ultimately in the third video I'm gonna make, we're gonna talk about hell and all the mistranslations there, so you can get through, because some of these things are used to misteach or as the basis for things concerning eternal torment and all of that. We're gonna get through all of that. But Jacob had 12 sons. He had, and we'll go through this when we go through the book of or the rich man and Lazarus. But the 11th son, you know, when Jacob left after he tricked Esau, he ended up getting tricked by Laban, and ended up Laban married him to the wrong woman, not the woman he loved. So he got Leah, and he had to work 7 more years for Rachel, who he loved. And ultimately he has 10 sons through a combination of Leah. And then Rachel was barren, so she could not have any. And so she gave him, much like Abraham did, she gave him her handmaiden to have a child with and a couple of children with. And then Leah gave her handmaiden for a couple. And so ultimately there's 10, but then God opens Rachel's womb and she has Joseph. And then ultimately she had Benjamin also, for a total of 12. But Joseph was Jacob's favorite. So you know the story. The brothers hated him because he was the father's favorite, and because God had done some things in Joseph, given him some visions, had kind of shown him that he was going to be raised up above his brothers. And ultimately they sell him into slavery. He ends up in Egypt. After 13 years or so, he is in one day transferred into the second most powerful man in all the earth. They come to Egypt. that whole story. They're looking for food. Ultimately, the entire group gets there, including Jacob. And during this time, it's important for you to know, during this time, Jacob, when he finds out that Joseph is still alive, and Joseph is married to an Egyptian, and he has two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and Jacob blesses them and takes them in as his descendant. So that'll be important here in just a second. So there are 12 tribes. They're known as the 12 tribes of Israel after they leave Egypt. They go through. They ultimately, as we've already talked, they decide they want a king. So God gives them a king after their own heart, Saul, for 40 years, then King David for 40 years. And when David dies, Solomon takes over for 40 years, and Israel is at its peak. The temple is built, but Solomon goes off the deep end, starts worshiping other gods, all of those kinds of things, making temples for his concubines, gods, and so God is, and he tells him that, the kingdom will be torn apart after his death. And so Solomon dies, and let me just preface this by saying when they came into the promised land, each tribe was given a parcel of land, a big area of land to settle down and spread out and have their families. But each tribe was given that. And after Solomon, the 10 tribes that were in the north, they came to Solomon's son Rehoboam, and they said, "Hey, your father taxed us to death to build all the stuff he built, and we just want to know if you're going to do that." And Rehoboam takes counsel from Ahithophel, and who's older, and then he takes it from his younger friends, and ultimately he decides to go with what his younger friends told him. And he said to Jeroboam, who kind of came as a representative of the 10 northern tribes, and he said to Jeroboam, he said, I have more strength in my pinky finger than my father had in his entire body, so yeah, I'm gonna tax you. And Jeroboam says, well, we're not doing that. We're gonna go and become our own thing. So that's what happens. The 10 tribes, and God tells Rehoboam not to follow them, not to go to war with them. So the 10 tribes that are in the north, they become the house of Israel. And the tribes that are in the south, or 3, because again, now there are 13 real tribes, even though they're still referenced as the 12 tribes, because Joseph's sons, obviously Joseph is gone, but Joseph's sons, the descendants, are part of the 10 tribes. So the southern kingdom includes Jerusalem, the temple, and all of that. And that includes Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. Levi was the priestly line. The house of Judah is what the southern kingdom became known as. So you've got the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Now, if you're reading through the Old Testament and you don't see that there are two nations here, you're going to be confused, because both of the nations have a king, and God sends prophets to each nation. That's going to be important for you to understand, because, for example, Jonah was a prophet to the house of Israel, the northern kingdom. And the house of Israel got to be named Israel because in parts of those things that people don't really read, when Jacob was dying, and he gave the blessings to his sons, all 12 of them, he gave the scepter to Judah, but he gave the birthright to Joseph. And so Joseph's sons carried that on. Therefore, that's why they got to take the name Israel, because they had the birthright. Judah had the scepter. So the northern kingdom is the house of Israel, and the southern kingdom is the house of Judah. Now, the house of Israel had kings. And just a little side note, if you read Kings, if you read 1st and 2nd Kings, Chronicles, if there's reference to a good king, that king is in the house of Judah. There were no good kings in the house of Israel. Okay, now, just a couple of side points before we end this one, and this one will be a two-parter, obviously, because I'm not getting anywhere. There were prophets. Hosea was a prophet to the house of Israel, and Hosea married God told him to marry a prostitute. He did. And that God is outlining for him what the house of Israel is going to be like. And all of that. Jonah was a prophet to the house of Israel. And we'll get into some things about Jonah, but a little point about Jonah is Jonah was, well, we'll get into that in the next one, because it deals with some things captivity-wise. So that may be a good part. We've got the 12 tribes. We've got 10 in the north, 3 in the south. Now you know why they're still referred to as the 10 tribes, but they're really 13. There's still references the 12 tribes, but there's really 13. And they're split, each with kings, each with prophets. Okay? We'll continue in just a minute. I love you all.